Hello everyone, friends. My name is Katya Sergienko and I'm an astrologer from Ukraine. Today I want to share with you the transits and forecast for the next 2 weeks. There's a very interesting situation in the sky right now because many planets have moved into different signs, and that always brings a powerful energetic shift. It's that feeling when things were one way and now they're somehow different, right? Some people feel it more, some less, meaning that everyone is experiencing changes in a certain area of their life, right? So I wanted to share this general background and at the same time talk about how and for whom it will have the greatest impact in principle, right? Because right now you could say a tense, but one of the most promising periods of this autumn is beginning, right? Since this is the result of the eclipse corridor, which actually ended a while ago. As I mentioned in my previous videos about the lunar eclipse, and I also have a separate video on my channel about the solar eclipse, this is not a one-time event, it's an unfolding of situations that takes place over several months. So when the lunar eclipse happened, yes, it gave an impetus. Of course, some events did happen, but it gave a push, a new turn for some situation to unfold so that something, let's say, could be cleared out of your life. In other words, it doesn't get resolved in a second, right? Some situations, for example, may have surfaced, but now they might quiet down and then after some time they could come up again. So this kind of lunar eclipse gives a 2-month period during which the situation unfolds, right? That is, in 2 months, you'll be able to assess what exactly has been removed, what has left your life because of this lunar eclipse, right? And since this lunar eclipse was a consequence of the lunar eclipse that happened in February, many people may have felt the completion of some story, right? So here it really depends on the context. And the solar eclipse is a whole different story because a solar eclipse sets an entirely new trend, a completely new chapter in your life, so it will be unfolding over the next 6 months. If you're interested in how this works, what kinds of situations in life it affects, I have webinars on this topic, so if you're curious, message me on Instagram and I'll tell you more. Now, about these 2 or 3 weeks after the eclipses, they are, you could say, kind of, on the one hand, the energy and tension seem to subside a little. On the other hand, it's a period when, certain curtains fall, so to speak, things are revealed. That is, when you used to see a situation one way and now you start to see it differently. And when such tense transits form in the sky, they can sharply change, well, a certain turn of events, so to speak. In other words, people might behave a bit irrationally. Well, what do I mean by irrationally? It's as if they're revealing their true nature, So especially if lately you've been getting really annoyed by people, or if you've noticed some strange behavior in others, that's not actually strange. Because eclipses, the eclipse corridor, this whole story, it's when very instinctive parts of our psyche come to the surface and people, well, they stop controlling themselves, you could say. They stop controlling their consciousness. And some strange situations happen, right? And strange reactions in those situations. And you might have also noticed some odd behavior in yourself. And this very odd behavior is exactly what you need to pay attention to. Because if you suddenly feel like doing something that's not typical for you, maybe it's some kind of cry from your soul. Or if a person used to behave one way with you, but during the eclipse or in these next 2 weeks starts acting differently, whether that's better or worse, it doesn't matter which way. The point is that's simply the person's true nature coming out. So we look at behavior without rose-colored glasses, you see? The most important thing is to assess the situation without rose-colored glasses at all. And these 2 weeks in general are basically aimed at helping you see exactly where you were wearing those glasses, essentially. And that's precisely why you might genuinely start to feel this incredibly active and potent Mars energy truly coming through right now. And for a great many people, this deep inner core, this profound inner strength will indeed powerfully emerge. Something that truly gives you a significant push towards something wonderfully new, Especially if you've been experiencing burnout, apathy, or even a depressive state for some time, now you might feel a surge of energy and a desire to act differently, to live differently altogether, to change everything in some situation that's particularly pressing in your life. This is exactly what the next 2 weeks will be about. Today I'll tell you which planets are setting the tone for this, where the challenges will be, and what it means for each zodiac sign, including yours. As of September 20th, Venus has moved into the sign of Virgo. Virgo is a very rational sign, so Venus, which is generally responsible for love and money, in Virgo is always about relationships without rose-colored glasses, about attitudes toward finances, and about relationships with people. Yes, that's why relationships become more honest. Right now, you might want things to be this way, and indeed, you may actually behave like this. All people start to notice. When Venus passes through the sign of Virgo, we begin to see the details, the little things, some nuances that we used to ignore, that we didn't pay attention to before, that we used to turn a blind eye to, but now they seem to come out. All these little things come to the surface. And this isn't just in relationships with a partner, it's in relationships with people in general. With friends, with relatives, it doesn't matter, with people in general. So, as I was saying, these things can show up in little details, and you need to pay attention to, well, more precisely, you will start to pay attention to things you didn't notice before, and it's important not to ignore this moment. As for money, yes, here common sense may start to appear. Right now, everyone has some kind of order, right? If everything was chaotic before with some spontaneous spending, now there may be less desire for that, right? The general mood is that you want less of that and more practical investments, so to speak, right? Or saving your finances. If we go through the zodiac signs by elements, then the fire signs, that is Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, may feel more criticism from their partner, right? So learn to take it more as help. Yes, as help when someone points out where you might be wrong, right? So don't react with an attack, yeah, but rather just take a closer look, right? That is, criticism isn't always a bad thing. It's just that through other people, we try to help ourselves in this way. If you have a water sign, if your zodiac sign is of the water element, Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, then you might feel the urge to take care of others, right? Specifically to provide practical care, to really invest yourself in the person, but it's important to be careful and not to confuse love with control. Yes, when you start to take care of someone to such an extent, or someone starts to take care of you to such an extent that it just becomes too much. Earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, this is a time right now when Venus is passing through Virgo for a whole month. It's a time to reap the rewards of your efforts, right? That's why relationships can become more stable. And money comes through the effort you put in, right? Through your work, through your discipline. So you might finally feel a good material result. Air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. In relationships, there may be a test of honesty, of truth, of desire, of voicing your wishes, of how you speak, what you say, and what is said to you, right? In other words, you need to pay attention to words, simply put, and is there enough air in the relationship, right? Is there enough, so to speak, oxygen in the relationship, right? So if there is a certain freedom or not, this hyper control can also show itself by starting to put pressure on you, right? And it will feel as if it becomes hard for you to breathe in this relationship. Or you might feel, for example, if you're not in a relationship, that you finally want to get grounded already, right? How long can this go on after all? So it's about this kind of energy. You just want to stabilize things somehow, right? To get grounded, and basically, yeah, if you're feeling pressured in a relationship during this period, then you need to show some clarity, right? To set kind of boundaries. So the general advice for everyone is bring order to your life. It won't hurt right now, will it? And this is the best time to pay off debts, stop dragging out toxic relationships, and really reassess your values and what you actually want. On September 23rd, the sun entered the sign of Libra and immediately created a kind of swing because it formed an opposition with Neptune. In other words, it creates a general background, a general feeling that we might get a bit lost in the fog, right? That there's still some situations that aren't completely clear yet, right? When you don't fully understand how you should act, someone might promise more than they can actually deliver, right? Someone might make plans, and there could be some desire that arises, an illusory one, right? Like, I want things to be this way, right? But after some time, it will become clear that things aren't actually like that. So this is about desire. It's about where our attention is focused. Right now, our focus might be a little off from where it actually needs to be. And so where you direct your energy and attention, what you devote your time to, right? What are you thinking about? What are you planning? What goals do you have? Right now, this moment, these next few weeks, they might feel a bit abstract, right? In other words, it's literally when I don't quite understand what I want, or if I understand very clearly what I want, then there's a danger here, right? So here you need to realize that this period, this Neptune influence, it blurs things a bit. Actually, it blurs things a lot. In a few weeks, you might sober up and realize, for example, that you didn't really want what you thought you did, right? So it's not that you shouldn't wish for anything or want anything or do nothing or not make any plans. You just need to understand that you should look at it a bit more rationally because it can lead you astray a little. And by the end of September, closer to the beginning of October, in the first days, the situation will already change because the sun will make different aspects. It will be a trine to Uranus and Neptune. This is the energy of change, of internal shifts, when energy starts to flow, when insights come, when the desire to do something appears, when all these ephemeral things and illusions are destroyed, and the opportunity arises to build, well, this understanding of what is it that I actually want, right? What do I want in relationships? What do I want in terms of money? What do I want in earnings? Where am I heading? And that's why right now is not the best time to make any drastic plans. Which zodiac signs will feel this the most? Well, of course, it's Libra and Pisces because this is a moment of testing where you deceive yourself, right? Because it directly affects this axis, right? Libra. Accordingly, that's why here you need to, Aries, by the way, as well, right? So here you need to understand to what extent your desires actually truly match your inner state, right? How comfortable are you with all of this? Aries, Capricorns, this is more about breakthrough energy. Yes, in your career and in relationships as well. So if there was some kind of stagnation, now you'll feel that something is starting to move. Aquarius, Gemini, you have a chance for new projects, including development and even some unexpected, you could say, twists in the direction you're heading, how you're developing, what's happening with you, some new and interesting opportunities. So the general advice for all zodiac signs during this period, for these next 2 or 3 weeks, is don't trust words, so to speak. Yes, check the facts more, and what will be hidden at the end of September and the beginning of October could become a starting point for your right decision. Yes, for understanding where you should go next, what you should actually do, and how to resolve a particular situation. Because right now, decisions might not be coming together completely yet. Yes, that is, you have some idea in your head of what needs to be done, but there isn't full clarity yet. This is Neptune, and when it moves away, the sun, yes, the general background of course matters, as do your personal transits. Obviously, a personal forecast will override this general background, but if we're talking about the energy that's in the air right now, it's really not conducive to any radical decisions, because if you make a decision now, in most cases, it will be reconsidered later. Since September 22nd, Mars has entered Scorpio. This is the energy of a warrior. But it formed a square with Pluto until the beginning of October. That's why some rather tough scenarios can come to the surface here. So there's quite a lot of tension this month, yes. That's why there can be conflicts, struggles, power struggles, control issues, jealousy, and the desire to once and for all either sort something out, break it off, or start something new. So this is about rather aggressive energies. Moreover, the real danger is in eating yourself up from the inside, yes? So if the tension is just around you, that's one thing. But if you realize that you're pushing yourself to the limit, for example, with anxious states, panic attacks, or however this tension manifests for you, if you have some kind of background anxiety in your life, it can really intensify now. Yes. That's why it's better, much better, to channel your energy into activity as much as possible over these next 2 or 3 weeks. Really try to think less, hide less, and just do, yes. So more action, less overanalyzing in your head. And if we're talking about zodiac signs, Scorpios, Aquariuses, Tauruses, and Leos are the ones most in the zone of tension. So there will be situations on the edge, yes, like it's all or nothing. That means you'll have to decide what you choose. And for the other zodiac signs, if we're talking about them, on the contrary, it's an opportunity to really feel an inner resource, a surge of energy. This is how this transit can actually play out positively. So there will be energy, and you need to direct it, decide where to channel it so that it circulates well. Because if you don't channel your energy, let's say, into something productive, into work, it will accumulate inside and settle as tension. You'll just end up taking it out on others through passive aggression. That's why it's important to use the inner strength that accumulates, not for fighting with someone, not to lash out at everyone, but for some effective breakthrough in your work. So this is a time when you can tackle what you've been putting off, the things that have been weighing you down, and finally you'll have the strength to finish them. On October 7th, Mercury will move into Scorpio, and again, there's this aspect of self-digging when we start getting into the details. And there will also be a full moon in Aries at that time. This is a very, very intense peak point for us. So here, there may be very sharp conversations, jabs, sarcasm, when people all start going at each other. This period for a few days, roughly from the 4th to the 10th, will be filled with a lot of sharp remarks and a lot of mental tension, tension in our thoughts. That's when it's most important to channel your energy into activity. So the culmination that will happen at the full moon is always a peak, an explosion. It's the maximum energy that should be directed toward realization. Otherwise, it turns into these swings, right? When the full moon is on the Libra Aries axis, it's always about me and other people, right? That's why it's very important to speak honestly with people. Yes, in general, really. Especially while Mercury is in Scorpio, but remember that every word you say has consequences, right? That's why when we're emotional, we try not to hurt anyone, because if you say something very harsh to someone, well, it's about how it will be hard to take it back later, right? There is a period now when you can really deeply hurt someone you love, respect, or who is important to you. You could even break off the relationship just by starting to say something. So that's the danger of this period of these weeks. But at the same time, there's also an opportunity to finally start talking if you haven't before, to finally sort out a situation that's been hanging over you. Maybe you didn't understand the person, or you didn't understand why they were behaving that way. Here you can start a conversation, and there's a very good chance you'll figure things out. A full moon is always a culmination, a moment when emotions, desires, and inner conflicts come to the surface. In Aries, it brings an explosion of energy. You feel like taking action, standing up for yourself, making the first move, even if it's scary. But it's not just a simple, momentary surge of raw energy. It's more accurately described as a significant test, a crucial moment where you are finally and truly ready to demonstrate some genuine courage. Wouldn't you agree? It's about where the barrier is, where you hold yourself back out of fear, or maybe because of dependence on others. When someone else's opinion seems to override your own actions. So this is about finally starting to act independently. So the moon is in Aries, right? This isn't about reacting to other people, it's about the swings, you know? If you currently have a situation where you're dependent on someone else, during the Aries full moon, this situation might intensify so that you finally make a decision for yourself. Yes, for yourself. So it's not about focusing on someone else, it's about finally figuring out what I want, yes, what I want, and how I'm going to act. The general atmosphere of the full moon is about a lot of impulsiveness, a lot of spontaneous decisions. Someone will take a risk where they've long been hesitant. There may be tensions in relationships. That's why Aries demands honesty, directness, yes, at the same time, you want compromise, but you also want to clarify the situation, and it's about the question: am I alone? Am I by myself? Or are we together? Yes, so how? How does this even happen? So, so here there might be these situations, as I said, if there's any kind of dependency and emotional attachment to a person, then this question will come up sharply, yes. Or if you're having tension in your relationship, you might, for example, decide that you want to continue on without this person. So the axis of relationships will really come to the forefront. And thanks to Mars in Scorpio and Mercury in Scorpio, and also Virgo, Venus in Virgo, yes, there will be a desire to really get to the bottom of things, to figure everything out, to put everything in its place. And in principle, this needs to be done, yes, meaning you shouldn't drag it out. I'll also give some brief recommendations on how this full moon will affect each zodiac sign, so that you understand how to act correctly. If you are an Aries, this full moon can really give you a huge surge of energy, a desire to renew yourself, to shed something. Yes, something old, some old baggage, but conflicts can also easily flare up. So, especially if you are somehow suppressing yourself. So, the advice is that it's important to act honestly with yourself, but not to act rashly, especially if you realize that, for example, a person or something you do is important to you. If you are a Taurus, you might feel like everything around you is happening too fast and demand some immediate decisions that you may not be ready for, perhaps. And if you are ready, then you need to act, yes, so maybe you even feel physically tired. So get rid of unnecessary fuss around you and keep your own pace. If you realize that you've been trying to make a decision about something for a long time and just couldn't, now is also a very good moment for that. If you are a Gemini, the topic of communication may become more intense, meaning that something hidden might come up in conversations and you'll have a chance to break off unnecessary connections. So your task is to speak directly, to be straightforward and not be afraid of honest conversations. For Cancers, the full moon will shake up the topic of family, as well as work, career, and achievements in society. That is, there may be a conflict between home and work. That's why it's important to find balance, because if you don't, your emotions will throw you off and you might, well, lose control in one of these areas. So it's important to take a look at where this conflict is brewing for you and what this situation is actually leading to, and to make a decision that you won't regret later. For Leos, this is a surge of courage. It's also about energy, about the desire to take action where you've been putting things off. But arguments are possible with those who don't share your point of view. So your task is to motivate the person, right? If you feel that you want to be with someone or do something, don't try to force your opinion through, don't push it, because if you push too hard at this moment, insisting that it has to be your way and no other, there's a risk of breaking ties that are truly important to you. Virgos may experience heightened issues around trust in general. Who can you open up to and who can't you open up to? So here you need to let go of whatever undermines your stability and your overall emotional calm. In other words, focus on your sense of inner comfort. For Libras, the topic of relationships will be more affected, yes. That is, there may be a kind of crisis in a couple, either me or you, my decisions or your decisions. Are we together or are we not together? So here it's very important. Yes, if you feel that something is going wrong in the relationship, what matters is honesty, having open conversations, and not avoiding the issues that truly bother you. In other words, if you are honest with the person who is next to you right now at this moment, there is actually a chance to completely change the direction of the relationship for the better. If you are a Scorpio, then your internal processes will be activated, your inner emotions, some old fears may surface, and old resentments may come up. That's why it's important to experience your emotions, to really go through them, not to suppress them, but on the contrary, to take something from this. So if some unpleasant things come up, if old situations resurface that start to bother you, yes, you don't have to run away from it. On the contrary, you should look at it, really look and try to understand, why is this situation happening to me? What can I learn from it? For example, if jealousy comes up, or this urge to control, to dominate, to manage things, and so on. Or on the other hand, you might withdraw into yourself. Why? Yes, this is more about those deep internal processes that are helping you now reach a certain emotional peak and finally make a decision for yourself that will allow you to move forward more calmly. Sagittarius may feel the urge to take risky steps, to finally do something you've been putting off. Sudden decisions are possible in friendships, projects, and relationships as well. So choose more. I mean, this is a period about courage, when you don't just sit back but actually take action because the time has come. Capricorn may experience a conflict between personal ambitions and responsibilities that arise in relation to other people. Yes, so it's important here not to take everything on yourself, not to burden yourself, especially emotionally. If you realize that something is already becoming too much for you, it's important to speak about it openly and honestly, especially if it concerns family, loved ones, and so on. Talk about it. In other words, don't carry what you no longer want to carry. This is also a point of inner comfort. What for you now feels like dead weight around your neck? Yes, that's what needs to be let go of. A situation that has already become unbearable for you may intensify, and you need to recognize it, see it, and let it go. For Aquarians, a period may begin where you make bold statements about yourself, like, I exist, here I am, and you may take actions that you haven't taken before. A new vision of your future may emerge, what you truly want it to be. So it's important not to rush here, to let your ideas mature and ripen, and not, well, I would even say on the contrary, don't make any sudden moves if you realize you're not ready yet. For Pisces, there may be emotional swings, a desire to escape from tension. That's why it's important not to escape into illusions, not to think things will just resolve themselves somehow, but rather to channel this into, creative pursuits. In other words, there can be a lot of energy. But if you just escape into watching movies and apathy, it won't lead to anything. So here it's important to express yourself through creative abilities, to channel your energy into that. In general, the full moon is a moment when the world shows us that if you don't start taking action yourself now, life won't act on your behalf. That's why, well, the full moon this time is all about the energy of action. The question is, what do you need to do here? What actions do you finally need to take depending on your current situation? So from September 20th to October 14th, we will experience this period when the rose-colored glasses will fall off, strength will awaken, and we need to understand, you need to understand, where you should direct this energy, what is unnecessary and needs to be removed, and where you finally need to start taking action. Therefore, this is a chance to clear space in your relationships, finances, and work, to remove everything unnecessary that you don't need. This is also a time of conflicts, obviously. Especially if you've been resisting for a long time, blocking something for yourself, avoiding honest conversations, then of course there will be conflict so that you finally resolve things. So if there is some kind of conflict, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You need to face it and understand that what is truly yours will never leave you. Yes, so there's no need to fear that something you need will leave your life, because life is not your enemy and the world is not your enemy either. It never takes away from us what we truly need. So if some conflicts are escalating right now and you realize that something is leaving, well, okay, let it be that way. I hope this forecast was useful for you. And if you have any questions, you can always write to me. I'll also leave a link to my Telegram channel in the description. There I post daily forecasts. So if you're interested, join in, and I would appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel.